Hello, my friends. Welcome to Origins. My name's Donn Chapman. It's my privilege to be your host. Origins is a forum where we take the evidence of science and we use it to validate the truth of creation. We have a great guest with us today. His name is Dr. Donn DeYoung, and he is the professor of science and mathematics at Grace College in Winona Lake, Indiana. And he's the author of 17 books on Bible science, and truly a great man of science and someone that's been in the creation science debate with us for a long time. Sir, it's so good having you with us.
Thank you, Don.
Well, today we're talking about creation. And you want to go through the days of creation. Now, a couple of questions. Does it matter if God made the world in 7 days?
Well, I think it is important, Don. It's what the Bible says, clearly.
That's right.
And to compromise that, to change the length of the creation week, once you tamper with Scripture, you're open to all kinds of changes and you're on dangerous ground.
So you're a scientist, but you believe in a literal 7-day creation.
Well, it's a refreshing alternative to the directions of science.
I'm with you on that. How long was a day? I mean, the sun doesn't get made for several days. Well, how do you measure a day?
Well, people have done many things with the days of creation. Some have said that these days were long periods of time. That's sometimes called the day-age theory. Others have said that perhaps there are gaps between the days, kind of a resting point for God. And I look at these theories and think, are we trying to help God out?
Yeah.
Well, He doesn't need our help. In fact, we must conclude God could have made everything in 6 microseconds if He wanted to.
Absolutely.
Or spread it out over 6 trillion years. But I believe it's clear from Genesis 1 and 2 that the creation week were literal 24-hour days. In fact, it's where we got our calendar from.
Now, this is an important thing when we think about 7 days, 6 days of work and a day of rest. That's not always been, has it?
Well, the fact is, Don, some cultures have been a bit embarrassed about the calendar and the 7-day week. There's really nothing in the sky that has a 7-day cycle. The moon or the planets, they're different. And so they have tried to change the length of the week, some cultures, to get away from any biblical hint in their nation. And there are some interesting examples over the year. Back in Revolutionary time in France, they thought, let's delete the 7-day week and instead establish a 10-day week, sort of a decimal week. I don't know what they call the other 3 days. Now, really, isn't a week long enough already?
Yeah, I think so.
To add 3 more days, there was great confusion. The French people did not know when to go to work, when to stay home, and society started to break down. And within just a year's time, they reverted back to a 7-day week.
That's right after the French Revolution. So that is a sort of a denial of anything that's of God. And so a 10-day week was part of that.
Now, this kind of experiment was tried again in the last century in Russia, where they proposed a 5-day week. In fact, the week went like this, Don: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, back to Monday. They deleted Saturdays and Sundays right off the calendar.
So you just went to work and went to work?
Well, to work for the motherland all the time.
Okay.
But of course, the Russian people like their weekends as much as anyone does. And so once again, there was great confusion in society, and they quickly went back to a 7-day week. It's part of our makeup.
So what seems to be arbitrary isn't arbitrary at all. What's in the Bible is what really works.
The calendar that we have on the wall, I believe, is a witness to the creation week with literal days.
That's fascinating. Well, let's go through those days together.
Well, now this creation week, everything takes place in 6 days, and it's not just kid stuff. I think we all kind of have to have in mind and wonder about what were those days like, what exactly happened. So let's begin with day 1.
All right, that's a good place to start.
Now, Genesis 1:3 tells us that on day 1, God says, "Let there be light." And there was light. He turns the lights on. This is not the sun. That doesn't come along till later on in the week. God doesn't need the sun. He is light and has His own sources. Light is so interesting. You know, we have light and dark and gray, and we could have just had that, but God didn't stop there. He made the colors, whether it's a rainbow or clothing or whatever. And I think it shows the artistic side of God, and that He made these colors really just for our enjoyment. Now, light's been studied by different people over the years. One of the founders, Isaac Newton, a great British scientist from centuries gone by, and he really analyzed white light and dissected it into its beautiful component colors. It's kind of interesting, when Newton did this, he wrote a book called the Principia over 3 centuries ago. It's a book that we're still studying today. That's what physics is.
Wow.
And when Newton came out with his book, his friends said, well, now you've done it, Isaac. You've explained everything, light and the planets and their orbits. They said, I guess we don't need God anymore. And Newton shot right back and said, I didn't do that at all. I'm just showing you how God designed and how he made light and some of those details. In other words, Newton was a godly man.
Most great scientists saw work from a premise of there being God, and therefore there was logic, and therefore there were orderly things to be discovered. Newton was one of those.
There's a wonderful heritage in these pioneers of math and science.
Yes, sir.
Here's another name that's of interest, Michael Faraday, another Englishman. Now, he's come to be called the greatest inventor of all time.
Wow.
Faraday made the first motor, the first generator, the first fan, all these kind of apparatus that surrounds us today. He comes from a very poor family. He was never able to go to school. He was homeschooled. But he was able to put equipment together and build batteries and come up with these early devices, and just became just excellent in this whole area. And Faraday as well has this great testimony. He belonged to a conservative Christian group in England, and has that kind of testimony. Again, a pioneer. It's just a great resource we have even to study these people and see what motivated them in their work and in their discovery. And they'll tell you that they were searching out God's secrets, the very things that he put in nature in the first place. Now, here's a complicated set of equations which actually describe light. These are differential equations, and it shows how intricate light really is. In fact, to this day, we don't really understand light. Sometimes it resembles a particle flying through space. Sometimes it acts like a wave, like a sound wave. We just live with this duality of light. Only God really understands light. And when he said, let there be light, that's what all these equations were involved when he established and set it up. Light is very impressive.
His creation's beyond our understanding, even from the first word he spoke.
Exactly.
That's
yes.
powerful. Thank you, sir.
Now, let's move on to day 2. And what happens here is a separation of waters. Apparently we have water world. It's an earth covered with water. And the verse in Genesis 1:6 is that God put some water above and other waters below. I guess the waters above will be clouds and humidity, and below we'll have groundwater and streams and rivers. Someone kind of commented that it doesn't sound like God did much on day 2. He just separated the waters and took the rest of the day off. But think about it. I think what really happens on day 2 is God makes the whole weather system. And with all those details, we still can't predict the weather. It's very complex as well. Now, there's no indication that it rained back then, talking about the weather. The first rain that's mentioned is when the big storm comes along in Noah's day. But at least everything was put in place for this whole weather system. And so this is day 2 when the waters are separated.
Is it fair to throw the word atmosphere into that?
That would be part of this story as well?
Yeah.
Yes. And you know, there are whole books written on water and its wonderful properties, its heat capacity and its temperature, and it goes on and on. It's not a simple chemical at all. The creation week again puts us in our place, just the beauty and the intricacy of all of nature. Day 1, light. Day 2, a separation of waters. Well, we move on to day 3, where the first life shows up. In fact, this is plant life. And this is Genesis 1:11. God is still preparing this world for mankind, the capstone of the creation week. And so now we have the plants and the trees. In fact, a question comes to mind here that we might ask ourselves, why did God make trees? Actually, there are 2 special Bible reasons for trees. All our reasons are suitable and good, but there's 2 interesting reasons that come about at the end of the creation week, where God's reflecting on his world, and he says trees were made to be good for food, apple pie.
Amen.
And also to be pleasing to the eye. The idea of aesthetics, looking at trees in wonder at their beauty. And no matter what time of year it is, the trees are just a treasure to look at.
Yeah, they really are.
Just fascinating to look at it that way, God's view
quite
of
an
creation.
artist, isn't he? Yeah.
And maybe that's even a reminder that once in a while we should take a walk in nature and enjoy the trees that God has made. Well, we're talking about day number 3 when God makes the plant world. And let me bring up another aspect of plants. In fact, think of a young corn shoot that's growing. And on a sunny day, what we have found is sunlight comes in through the top leaves, right down through the stem into the underground roots. And if you could somehow clear the soil away, there's light underground, visible light.
Wow.
It's one way that they get energy down there to grow. Now, they're also using moisture and nutrients from the soil, but solar energy as well. And what that kind of transmission of light reminds us of is this whole term fiber optics, which is very popular today.
You hear that a lot.
Email is being sent by fiber optics and communications of various types, and they're greatly improving that. And one way that they're studying fiber optics is through this corn that really has natural fiber optics. In fact, I brought a piece of fiber optics along here today. The black part is a covering. The optics is actually rather clear material. Perhaps we could try a little experiment together, Don. Let me give you this end.
Thank you, sir.
This is about 10 feet long, I would guess. And what I'd like to do is take a light and shine it in this end and see if we can get the light to focus on through and come out your end. I've got a laser beam here, and it's kind of a green light, as you can see. And I'm going to point it into this end of the fiber optics. It's a fairly bright light. And so let me take this thing now. We need to watch your end here. In fact, let's complicate this a little bit more. Let me tie this thing in a knot just to make it more difficult. Now, if this was in your backyard, if this was a garden hose, could you shine a flashlight in one end and get visible light out the other?
No.
Just try it. It won't work. But this is fiber optics. So let me take this beam here and shine it in this end.
There it comes.
And I'm looking at your end as well.
Same green light down here you have up there.
The light's passing on through.
That's right.
And you know, this is a short length, but if this stretched clear across the state, you would still get the light coming out the far end. There's just no end to it. This is called total internal reflection, and it's quite a complicated process the way this operates. Fiber optics is just very efficient. It's replacing copper cables and other things all around the country, and it's actually made out of sand, so there's plenty of it to work with. And where are we coming up with the ideas on how to improve and build better fiber optics? By studying corn, which was there all the time, another wonderful design from nature that I think God put in place.
So God understood fiber optics a long time ahead of the rest of us.
I like this idea, yes, of design in nature, just waiting for us to find and explore.
Yes,
well, we're taking a walk through the creation week. We had days 1, 2, and 3. Now we come to day 4. It's actually my favorite day of the creation week. And it's 99% of the creation, because this is the sun, moon, and stars when God puts everything in the lights in the sky above. The verse that goes along with this is Genesis 1:16. God makes the greater light, the sun. He makes the lesser light, the moon, and the stars also. We might think about each of these objects for just a moment that God makes. This greater light, the sun, notice that that is put off till day 4. Someone says, well, how can you have the first 3 days without the sun? I'm not sure what the earth was orbiting, but it does show that the sun is not all important. People have often worshiped the sun, and I think God is saying, no, I'll even save it till the end of the week. It's just part of the whole creation story. So we have this greater light that rules the day. In fact, we might just think for a minute, just how great is it? How large is the sun? It doesn't look that big in the sky, but of course we can feel its warmth and see its light. Can you imagine that the sun were, let's think about it as a basketball, like a big hollow ball.
Okay.
And poke a little hole in it. Do you suppose you could drop a whole world inside the sun, a planet Earth?
Oh, yeah.
Pretty good size Earth we live on. We've done some traveling, but yes, you could fit in an Earth. In fact, how many do you think you could fit in? 100? 1,000? Actually, you could fit 1 million worlds inside the sun. They'd rattle around like little BBs inside a basketball.
Wow.
It truly is the greater light that rules the day. Of course, the sun is not hollow like a basketball. It's filled with chemicals, million-degree temperatures, and energy. And speaking of energy, the sun gives off more energy in 1 second than mankind has produced since Adam and Eve.
Huh.
And of course, it doesn't rest at night. It's always going all the time. It's always coming up somewhere. And it just continues to blaze like that, more than all of human history. Someone says, well, is it going to run out of gas one of these days? All we can say is that if you could see the gas gauge of the sun, it's still pinned on full.
Is that right? Okay.
It actually uses hydrogen, it converts it to helium, and the sun has plenty of energy to last through this whole age that we live in.
I'll have to find something else to worry about because the sun's not going to go away.
It's very faithful for us. Well, in second place, we've got the moon, which of course doesn't have any light of its own. It's a faithful reflector of the sunlight, and that's our lesser light at night. And the last part of that fourth day was the stars.
Wow.
And it's got to be more than 99% of all creation, stars everywhere we look. In fact, we've got a total number of stars that we have measured up through this day, and it's overwhelming. The known stars that have been photographed would be the number 1, followed by 22 zeros. In words, 10 billion trillion stars.
10 billion trillion stars. That's a lot of stars.
It's more than a trillion for every person on Earth.
It certainly declares the power and the majesty of God to make all that in one day. We've got to take a break, Dr. DeYoung. Don't you go away. We're going to talk about the rest of Creation Week. We'll be right back.
Today's guest on Origins, Dr. Donn DeYoung, has a PhD in physics and is chairman of the Science and Mathematics Department at Grace College in Indiana, where he has been on staff since 1972. He is also president of the Creation Research Society and an author of many books which are available at the website www.creationresearch.org. Dr. DeYoung can be reached at Grace College, 200 Seminary Drive, Winona Lake, Indiana, 46590. Dr. DeYoung speaks on creation topics and believes that the details of nature are a powerful testimony to the Creator's care for mankind.
We are back with Dr. Donn DeYoung, and we're talking about the days of creation in Genesis 1 and just remembering what God made on each day. And Dr. DeYoung, we're on day 4, and we talked about the creation of the stars, which is well over 99% of the creation in one swoop, one great word that God spoke on that day. But the stars weren't just randomly thrown out there, this billion, trillion stars that you told us about. There's order to them, isn't there?
Well, Don, these stars have interesting shapes and distributions in the sky. I've got an example here of the Large and Small Dipper in the northern sky that we're familiar with. And these stars are attractive to look at, and they're even useful. For instance, we've all heard of the North Star, Polaris. Well, you can find that easily. On a clear night, if you can locate the Big Dipper in the north, these two stars right in here are called pointer stars, and if you go up this way, you come to this important star, Polaris, the North Star. Actually, it's positioned directly above the North Pole, so if you're at the pole, you'd be looking straight up. And of course, that's always due north. So if a person was lost and could locate the stars and the North Star, that would tell you north, and then you can find your other directions as well. This has been very useful to many people over history, to explorers, backpackers, or whatever. Here we have the flag from Australia. And what we have down under is called the Southern Cross. They're kind of proud of it. They put it on their flag. In fact, so does New Zealand. And if I could just highlight what this looks like, it's a very small constellation, and it is a very distinct cross shape. Now, some might say, I can't see these pictures in the sky. Everywhere I look, I see boxes or figures. If you do a lot of study of the sky, there is something to these patterns. They are there. And so we have the Southern Cross below the equator. But you don't have to travel down there, because up here in our northern skies, in the summer season, we have what's called the Northern Cross. Now, they do place a swan over the top. In fact, it's called Cygnus. Let me just highlight this Northern Cross like this. It's actually larger than the Southern Cross, and I think even more distinctive. But think about this. In both hemispheres, we have this symbol of the gospel of the cross, and it's there if you have the interest and the eyes to see it. Well, we're taking a walk through the Creation Week, and now we're up to day 5, where the first animal life shows up, the fish and the birds. And once again, there's design every place we look. We might just feature for a minute on the idea of birds, and think about a feather. Now, you have one there, Don. If you
I
can
do.
just hold
An
it
orange
up.
one, by the way.
Yes, that's actually a chicken feather that's been dyed. Do you notice how lightweight it is? I mean, whatever it's made
Light
out
as a
of,
feather.
keratin,
Yes, sir.
so that it can fly and make use of that. And just to try a little experiment, Don, can you take the side of that feather and pull down on the side fins? In fact, do that several times.
Ruffle it up.
You know, if you do that and listen closely, you can even
ruined it.
hear a sort of a click as it opens up that way.
Yes, sir.
And now that's half of the experiment, but now the other half is to put the feather back together again. This time you kind of need to stroke upward on it multiple times, and there it is. And it becomes a solid surface, actually, that's waterproof by the time you're done. And you can pull it apart, you can put it back together. In fact, birds will do this when they're preening themselves. Now, the fascinating thing is, if you look at a feather closely with, let's say, a microscope, the picture kind of shows that there are hundreds of many little hooks that kind of grasp each other. And when you pull down, they pull apart. And when you stroke upward, they reconnect. It's sort of like a fastener that works. And what does that remind you of?
Velcro. It's like this has little Velcro in it that hooks them together.
Well, Velcro. It's on the children's shoes. It's on our own jackets. It's everywhere. Actually discovered by an Englishman a few decades ago when he saw a cocklebur sticking to the fur of his dog. And it's the same kind of device, small hooks that grab each other and can pull apart. You know, Velcro is said to be one of the great inventions of the last century. Well, we didn't really invent it. We just found it in nature. It was there all the time. This is God's Velcro in a feather or in a cocklebur, more design in nature.
You continue to show us, Dr. DeYoung, that so many of the things that we invent, we really are just copying what God already made.
Exactly. That's where engineers and inventors are looking today, to nature, really to creation, for new ideas that are just there as a treasure for us to make use of. Now we come to the last day, day number 6, and this is when the rest of the animal world shows up, as well as our first parents, Adam and Eve, and the whole week is completed and glorious in every way with these literal days of creation. When you look at Scripture closely here, it talks about, as far as the animals, the cattle and the wild animals that were made. In fact, this brings up an interesting question, thinking about history. How about dinosaurs?
Everybody wants to know about dinosaurs.
Where do they fit in? Now, the popular idea today is that these creatures lived in a land before time. In other words, I guess, long before Genesis, but that doesn't work out. Everything is made during the creation week. I would propose that dinosaurs are on day number 6, that God made them along with all the other animals. I think we've been misled with this idea that they lived long, long ago. We can find their footprints. We can find their bones now and then, large bones. Here's a little Argentine boy standing next to a backbone vertebrae from one of the largest dinosaurs we know.
That's the single vertebrae that he's standing next to there.
And that's about all we found.
Yes.
There were giants in the earth in those days. And the thing about these dinosaurs is they never stopped growing. The older they got, the larger they got. So these were kind of the old timers. Now, we don't know what Argentinosaurus looked like. We don't know their skin color. And so these kind of artistic pictures are drawn. But whatever they were beautiful animals, and they had their proper place in creation. People also show up on day number 6, and we are not animals. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says that we have the idea of eternity, the fellowship with God in our hearts, and that sets us above the animal world. In fact, we are supposed to care for the animals. We're responsible for this world. And that's the creation week, a wonderful time when God supernaturally made everything.
You know, it makes so much sense when you talk to us like that, and I love the way you end, because the image of God in us certainly separates us from everything else, and I think that's a distinction, the sacred worth of every human being that we need to never give up. Thank you for your faith. Thank you for the scientific undergirding to it, and thanks for sharing with us. You know, my friend, God is our creator, and creation fits perfectly with all that we know about science if we'll just take eyes and look at how incredibly He's made the world and how He's made you. Remember, my friend, it's God's view that He created you. That should be your worldview too. Hope to see you again here soon on Origins. And until then, God bless you, my friend.
Thank you for watching this edition of Origins. To get a copy of the information presented today, you can download a PDF file of program number 1109 from our website at www.originstv.org. Or for a DVD of this series, send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling and write to Origins, program number 1109, Cornerstone Television, Wall, Pennsylvania 15148.
Origins is made possible by the faithful prayers and the financial support of you, our Cornerstone Television family.